Naples, folks. So glad you're tuning in tonight. It is Monday, August the 24th, and it is 6 o'clock, and it is time for the devotion. Thanks for checking in with us either tonight live or later on in the week as you're listening to us on recorded medium here on Facebook Live or later on YouTube Live. Just glad to have you here. As always, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into what we were talking about Sunday. And we're in a series on coping. And this week we looked at the story of Ruth and Naomi, and probably Boaz's story as well. We talked a little bit Sunday about the whole story. This is pre-Davidic kingdom, at a place where Ruth and Naomi, it's ancient Near Eastern culture, and there was a concept in ancient Near Eastern culture called the kinsman redeemer, which we're going to come to tomorrow night even more as we focus in on Boaz. Actually, we'll be on Boaz Thursday night. Tomorrow night we'll be looking more at Ruth. Tonight we're going to look at Naomi, and we're going to kind of take a good deep dive into who Naomi was. Naomi was a Hebrew who was living in Moab. She was living among the Moabites. It doesn't tell us very clearly in the first chapter, how it came to be. Other than that there was a famine, and there was a man of the tribe of Judah who came to live in Moab with his wife and his two sons. And his name was Elimelech, and that was her husband. And we don't know what was the famine, how long was the famine, who he particularly was connected to. We do find out later on that he had relatives. He came from a fairly prominent family, and that out of that family also came Boaz. So the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of the two sons was Mahlon and Chilion. I kind of like Chilion. That's a cool name. If I hadn't thought about it, we might have named Andrew Chilion. What's your name? I'm Chilion. Maybe not. His two sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. And they came into the land of Moab, and then he died. But she was left with two sons. And in those days, if you were a widow, then your sons took care of you as a responsibility. That's kind of today. If you have a parent and you only have one parent, it falls to the children eventually to care for the parents. It's part of aging, is that first they care for you, then you're independent, and then you care for them. It's part of the bigger cycle of family. And it's as ancient as the ancient Near Eastern culture of the Bible. And so Naomi had her sons, and they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. And the name of one was Orpah, and the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. So if you look at their story, we don't have this huge context, but it's a little bit of a context. We know a bit about Moab. We know a bit about the Moabite culture. And we know that they married two Moabite women. Now, this would have been something that would have not been uncommon in the early Semitic peoples to marry into other Semitic tribes. The Moabites were, after all, long lost relatives, not long lost, but distant relatives of the Hebrew people. But the longer in time after the Exodus, the longer in time after the occupation of Palestine and the possession of the Holy Land, the land promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the longer after that, the closer in time to the Davidic kingdom, the more taboo intermarrying became. As a matter of fact, that's how the Samaritan people became looked down upon. They were clearly Jews, but they were Hellenized Jews that had been completely wrapped up in the culture of the world around them. They were part of the northern kingdom that had fallen earlier, several hundred years earlier than the southern kingdom. See, Israel, after David and Solomon, the nation of Israel divided into 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south. The southern tribes were Judah and Benjamin, and then the other 10 tribes in the north. And that northern 10 tribes formed the nation of Israel, and the southern 2 tribes formed the nation of Judah. And eventually they both fell and were taken captive and taken into captivity, into exile. But the northern kingdom never came back. They were plagued by some of the most awful, most corrupt, the most broken of rulers. There were a few highlights, but by and large, if you go through and look at the history of the northern kingdom, it was not good. And because of that, they never came back. Now, their people were scattered. It was one of the first diasporas of the Hebrew people, meaning the spreading out, and they lost their identity to a certain extent because they interbred. As a matter of fact, that was one of the rules that the Hebrew people had when they came into the Holy Land with Joshua when they took occupancy, is they should not marry into other people groups. They should remain a separate people to maintain their cultural and religious identity. And I tell you all that to give you a little bit of a background that this was a period of such famine that this guy, Elimelech, left his home in Judah, which survived for 200 some odd years longer because they weren't as plagued by poor leadership, corruption, and all the other problems, although eventually they were conquered by the Babylonians. So this period here is pre-divided kingdom. Even Davidic kingdom, and in all likelihoods, it is set in the Judges period. Because at the very first it says, now it came about in the days when the judges governed. So, that's a pretty clear indication. Now, there's some level of how that worked, but we believe this was during the period of Judges, pre-Davidic kingdom. Because we know that it is because we read later on in here of how Elimelech and then Naomi and then Ruth and Boaz, their children, gave birth to Obed. They gave birth to Obed, and Obed gave birth to Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David the king. So we got the timeline there. And so this was a period after the conquest, during the Judges. Now, we don't know which particular judge, or if it is an inter-judge period. There were periods when the judges reigned, and the people forgot about, the judge died, they forgot about God, they went and did their own thing, they were oppressed. We don't know where in that story that it is. Or is it in proto-Israel, proto-kingdom, in the early stages, right before the initiation of the kingdom period and the initiation of Saul. So, got that. So, if this guy's outside of Judah, there's got to be a good reason for it. He leaves, and he's there, and he's with his wife Naomi, and she and he are there, and then he dies. But luckily, they got 2 sons. But these sons take Moabite women. They're in Moab. Seems like the right thing to do. But that would have also made their children half-breeds. And it would have been kind of we probably can't go home. Right? We probably can't go home again. We've kind of crossed that Rubicon and we're outside. Right? That ability to make, they can go home, but there will, they'll be talked and people will look at them. you know, like, you married outside. Now, we know today that that would be strange to us. We know that people are people. All people are all people. And that um, what matters is, are you equally yoked in faith? Meaning, do you share a similar faith and belief system? And are you professing Christians, which is part of that? And then, do you love each other? And has God called you to be together and mutually called you? So those are the things we know today. So this is all foreign to us. But in that day, this would have been an issue. And I want to lay that as the foundation. As we look at Naomi, Naomi's got these two sons, and she's got these two daughters-in-law, and they lived there about 10 years. Right? And then her sons died. And so the three women are kind of left alone. She had no children. She had no husband. So the whole book of Ruth starts out as Naomi's story. And as you read through it, you find out that she is the major player. That really it's Naomi that is the mover and shaker. She's the one that's shaping events. But it's not called the book of Naomi. It's called the book of Ruth. Why is that? Well, it's because perhaps it is the story of Ruth that is meant to inspire us. Now, not knocking Naomi, because she has an inspirational life and does some very inspirational things. But while she may be the protagonist, Naomi may be Ruth may be the protagonist. Naomi may be a co-protagonist in this story. So, all right. So we have her and her daughter-in-laws rise, and they go back to the land of Moab. And because they'd heard that the Lord had visited his people and had given them food. And they left where they were, and they went back, and they went on their way to go to Judah, because they had heard things had gotten done. So they were leaving the land of Moab and leaving the land of Moab and going to Judah, because they had heard things were getting better. All right. And so as they're on their way, Naomi knows that this is a big deal, because this is two Moabite women who are without their husbands. They're going back as widows, people outside the social safety net, outside the support structures, all these things. All this is going on, and she knows, right? Because, Naomi's a smart lady. Later on, we're going to find out she's really smart. She says, hey, go back to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with the dead and with me, as you've dealt with my sons. And you've been good to me, but I can't ask you to go to Judah. That's a long way. It's not your people. It's not your God. You won't be as accepted. I'm asking a lot of you here. So, if you want to go back home to your people who will receive you and take care of you, then go ahead. And she kissed them, and they all wept. The interesting is the response of the two girls. Both of them at first said, no, we're going. We're going. And Naomi's response is real interesting. Starts in about verse 11 of chapter 1. Return, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I'm too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they've grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you. For the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. So Naomi's at a place where she's really lost hope. She really did. She got in this really deep place, because in her day, it was the responsibility of the son, the brother, to marry the wife of his brother. If his brother died, he was to marry his brother's wife, right? And give him an heir, meaning give her a child And that child will be the heir of the brother, not him, but his brother. And she's like, I don't have any sons left to redeem you, girls. There's not a kinsman redeemer for you. I don't have anybody. I don't have any more sons. I'm not sure anybody in the family will step up to the plate. It's much worse for me. I can't take a husband. I'm too old. And even if I could and have children, would you wait for them to grow up so they can marry you? No. She said, the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Sometimes when we're in the midst of tough times, when we're in the midst of struggle, sometimes maybe it feels like, Lord, what's next? Who had double hurricanes on their 2020 bingo card? Did you? I didn't. I didn't. And every time I say it, it can't get worse. It's like, what? I'm like, oh my gosh, it's something new. Maybe it does feel like the hand of God. I mean, after Katrina, a lot of very public Christians said that it was God's judgment on New Orleans. I didn't believe that. I don't believe that's the way God operates. But maybe New Orleans and the response to New Orleans and everything that happened before and after Katrina is a judgment on us. Maybe it's a judgment on us that there were buses sitting nearby that were not used to evacuate people. Maybe it's a judgment on us that there had been money allocated for the levees for 50 years that had ended up in different pockets and different projects, right? So maybe that, but I don't believe that was God's judgment on us. There is going to come a judgment. We all will face the judgment, right? But that's the judgment in the eschaton, when we will be judged for our acts if we are not part of God's family. Everyone will face judgment on what they have done and what they have not done. But for those with their names written in the Lamb's Book of Life, we will be judged by whether our name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life. It's a different story for us. But I certainly understand how Naomi was really at a place, particularly in this time period, where she felt like this is God's hand on me. God is judging me. But I want you to note something. She kept going home. She didn't stop. She told her daughters to go back. One listened, one didn't. We're going to look at that a little more tomorrow night. But Naomi had lost heart and had got depressed. But she didn't stop going back to Judah. She didn't stop moving home. She didn't have all the answers. She said, God's hand is against me. I can't have any more kids. There's really no hope for me. But I'm still going to Judah. Right? I mean, that's the most amazing thing. The most amazing thing to me. She just kept going. She just kept going. And I think that is a miracle in and of itself. And she didn't give up. We flash forward to her saying, we're gleaning the fields. We're doing what is necessary. Sometimes that's called plodding. Sometimes that's called grinding. I have a reputation for being a grinder. Just grind it out. Sometimes you just got to keep putting one in front of the other. It's just like hard and like, this is tough. You just got to take one step, then another, and then another. And Naomi did. She never quit moving. We talked about that weeks back when we talked about just keep swimming, right? Just keep swimming. Sometimes that's coping. For Naomi, it gives me hope because sometimes I feel like, the world's against me. The whole thing is turned over for me. The whole thing I just don't know. This is awful. I just don't know. Why is these things happening? I know you've been there too. when those things happen, it is good for me to know that there are people like Naomi, even back then, who said, I'm just going to keep walking towards Judah. Why? Because I'm going home. Why? Because that's where my people are. That's where my God is. I'm going back. If you look at the bigger picture, that is the real story for us, right? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to break out. I don't know how it's going on. But I'm going to just keep heading towards home to worship my God. I'm going to keep on worshiping. I'm going to keep on moving. I'm going to keep on trying. Naomi did that. Maybe it should be called the Book of Naomi. I titled this sermon this Sunday, Faithfulness in the Midst. I like that because while it obviously applies to Ruth being faithful in the midst of great tragedy, I think it also applies to Naomi being faithful in the midst of great tragedy for her. Faithful to her family, faithful to life. She may have despaired, but she didn't give up. It's a lot to learn from that. And she's heading back home with one of her daughters, her daughter-in-laws, who's a Moabite woman. So I got her to take care of too. But, come on. I grew up in rural Prentiss County, and I heard my grandfather was a sharecropper. He lived on an acre of land my dad gave him. He never owned any property other than that 1 acre of land. He didn't have much. They were sharecroppers all their lives, worked up somebody else's property. That's what I heard about. I heard about the Depression and how bad it was in Mississippi, particularly northeast Mississippi, during the Depression, and how people had to really just scrape to get by, and the things they did to get by. But they did it, and they just kept trying. They just kept sharing. And here's the thing. Somebody would come up and be in worse shape than them. I mean, they're in horrible shape. Not anything. Not enough food for their family, but somebody else comes up in worse shape and like, come on, sit down at the table. We'll cut it one more time. We'll divide it even smaller. But nobody gets left out of the table. That was an ethos that burned through me as a child. That was an ethos that the stories that I heard my grandparents tell about living through the Depression, it was an ethos that burned through me that just made me understand that there's always somebody in worse shape. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we all get across the finish line as much as we can. To share what we got as much as we can. To help each other out as much as we can. I'm sure Naomi thought this would be a whole lot easier if Ruth doesn't come with me, not realizing that it was Ruth that was going to make it possible. Naomi couldn't see the big picture. She didn't know that Boaz was going to go walk out and go, man, who is that? Didn't know that he would be like smitten. Didn't know that would be an opportunity for her to go, whoa, something's here. But the other thing that we don't need to miss is when it presented itself, that opportunity, Naomi saw it. She was aware enough to see it, and she took it. She's like, oh, well, hold on a minute here. There's a door. People ask me how I sense God's calling in my life, and I have always done it by doors and windows. What do I mean by doors and windows? Well, I mean it like this. That oftentimes I say, God, please close this door if you don't want me to go through it, but open the window you want me to crawl through. And that's the way I sense where he's moving me. Which direction am I going? Left, right? Well, this door closed, but this door opened. Seems to me that God closed some doors in Moab, but left a door open with Ruth for Naomi, and then opened a bigger door with Boaz. And Naomi drove her whole family right through it. Pretty good. Pretty exciting. Are you proactive enough to take a chance when it opens the door? When God says, here's an opportunity, are you going to have the courage to walk through it? Are you going to be able to recover from those moments of despair and know that they're just fleeting? That they'll be here and they're going to happen. And you're going to go, man, I cannot take any more of this. But those moments are fleeting. The bigger picture is what God is doing. The bigger picture is what he's going to keep doing. Are you willing to keep putting one foot in front of the other? Are you willing to be faithful in the midst of whatever you're going through? Are you willing to be faithful to your Father in heaven? I hope so. I really hope so. I think that it might be the difference in 2020 for all of us. To take the opportunities that God's putting in front of us, to take that step of courage, to take chances, to walk through the doors that he opens, to never completely give up. Admit when we're at our wits' end. Admit that it feels like God's hand is against us. So say, yeah, this feels awful. I don't like it. And God, I don't see any good here. Confess that to him, but say, Lord, let you redeem it. Wow. 2020 has been crazy. But I believe God's in the redeeming business. So if it's been this crazy, double hurricanes, corona, wildfires, California, and Australia, and elsewhere, just all kinds of crazy stuff this year. And as crazy it's been, how much more powerful could it be? How much more powerful could the resurrection, redemption coming out of 2020 be? See, that's what I keep hoping for. Is that God's going to do through this? It's going to be greater than anything we've seen in a long time. Hold fast to that. Hold fast to that hope. And watch out for cracked windows and doors standing ajar. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I want to ask you to do something tonight with me. I want to ask you to pause for a few moments and just lift up a prayer tonight for the people on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and all along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi that are staring down the barrel, a double-barreled shotgun of two storms. Not happened in over 60 years, back to back. Also pray for our friends in California that are struggling with really incredible wildfires. And also pray for the folks in Des Moines, Iowa that really suffered some incredible damage from some wind. We're going to pause for just a few seconds as you lift those prayers. Amen. Thank you for praying for them. Pray for each other and keep praying for the people of the Gulf Coast as the first storm looks to make landfall, I think, tomorrow. So lift those folks up. I spent 4 good years on the coast, great years, in a wonderful church called Gateway United Methodist Church on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Great people. Pray for them. Salt of the earth. So let's lift each other up. That's why we're a connectional church. That's why we're Methodists. God loves you. I'm fixing to hit 30 minutes, and I think Sam has installed a shocker feature on Facebook. If I hit 30 minutes, that it's hooked up to a battery somewhere that I'm going to receive some sort of electrical shock. So I got 1 minute to get off of here. Thank y'all. God loves you. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow night.